Want to call to order the planning commission meeting. Depends. What is the date? Oh my gosh. Thursday, May 8th here at the Public Safety Building. Rachel, can we get a roll call for who's attendance?
Of course. Randy Rickert,
Here.
Jason Dale,
Here.
Lainey Quinn,
Here.
Elise Steffen is absent. Chris Wright,
Here.
Newton Curtis is absent. Matthew Mansfield,
Here.
and Jose Villalpando is absent.
Thank you, Rachel. This evening, we just have the one item on the agenda.
My
for-
apologies. Jose is actually just joined on Zoom, so I'll let him in.
Jose just joined on Zoom? Oh, fantastic. Okay, thank you. And he's good? Okay, thank you so much. So we just have the one item on the agenda this evening, for the public hearing. Thank you for the public who is in attendance here and in Zoom. We've been working on this for a long time, I feel like, so we're excited to kind of get to this point, and thank you guys for your interest. Let's see, discuss future time allotments. Should we call for any abstentions, objections to jurisdiction?
Commissioner Quinn?
Yes.
We need to see if we can approve the planning commission, and you also need to open the floor for any testimony not on the agenda this evening.
Okay. Following. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Wright. So this is the time for any public comment for anything that is not already on the agenda. Is that correct? Okay. This is legislative. So are there any public comments on Zoom or otherwise before we get started? No. Thank you. Let's work on item number 4 is the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to consider the meeting minutes?
Planning Commissioner Wright motions to approve the April 10th Planning Commission meeting minutes as written, except as follows. Page 2 of 3, paragraph 4, second sentence. Strike Chair Newton, add Commissioner Wright. I'm the one who expressed concern about the limited public input process with the special use permits. And I would like to also add in eliminating LUBA in the process. And then add Chair Newton felt the Planning Commission was making waves, and in retaliation from City Council, the Planning Commission was being removed from the short-term rental or vacation rental hearings process. Thank you.
Commissioner Wright, can you state one more time where you were referring to here?
Sorry. Page 2 of 3, fourth paragraph, second sentence. It states that Chair Newton expressed concern, and that was actually me. And she felt that the Planning Commission had made that other statement. And I did review the YouTube video to confirm.
Okay, I hear a motion. Is there a second?
Yeah, Commissioner Rickert will second that.
Okay. Can we do a roll call, or is it all in favor? Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Rickert, Dale,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Wright,
Yes.
Mansfield.
Yes.
Thank you. And for those on Zoom, let's consider the mute button if need be, just when you're not ready to speak, just so we have that going for this afternoon, for this evening. Okay, item number 5 is the legislative public hearing. Now is when I believe I will call for any abstentions or objections to jurisdiction. Hearing none and then seeing none on Zoom either? Nope, okay. Let's go ahead and move forward to the staff report, please.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. My name is James Dingwall, one of the assistant planners, and we're going to be going through the presentation of the staff report for the first public hearing of the proposed vacation rental home policy updates for your recommendation to City Council. Staff's recommendation is to consider the staff report, public testimony and the findings, deliberate, then make a motion to adopt resolution number 2025-399 as amended, which recommends that the City Council adopt the development code amendments to update the city's vacation rental home policy. Going over the process to get where we are for the development code amendment. In March, City Council directed staff to update the vacation rental home regulations following recommendations from the Planning Commission, Ad hoc Commission. On August 22nd, the City Council hosted a community listening session, and in November and December, Community Development Department staff held public engagement events. On April 3rd, a post-acknowledgement plan amendment notice was filed with DLCD for the proposed land use change. On April 10th, last month, you all held a public a work session on the proposed code language. And on April 24th, the notice of the public hearing was published by the Newberg Graphic. And kind of taking a high level look at the project objectives again as we get started. First, growing tourism responsibly, leveraging opportunities at the city of Newberg to foster growth in tourism while minimizing conflicts between the city's residents and visitors. Second, improving compliance rates, implementing operational changes and updating local regulations that improve compliance rates for permitting, business licensing, and transient lodging tax remittances. And third, improving knowledge of vacation rental home operations, improving the understanding of local vacation rentals, and remaining responsive to community needs relating to them. The proposed amendments include changes to Title III, Revenue and Finance, specifically the transient lodging tax provisions, and Title 15, Development Code, specifically the zoning use table and special use standards for vacation rental homes. Starting with Title III, there are a couple definitions included in the staff report to cover that were referenced in the changes. First is an agent, and that includes, but is not limited to, an online or internet-based booking service, such as Craigslist, Airbnb, Vrbo, HomeAway, Flipkey, Vacation Rentals, Roomorama, or a travel intermediary, or a person listed by the Oregon Real Estate Agency. And then secondly is an operator, which means the person who is a proprietor of a hotel and motel in any capacity, and where the operator performs their functions through a managing agent other than an employee, the managing agent who shall have the same duties and liabilities as the principal. Compliance with the provisions of the chapter by either the principal or the managing agent shall be considered to be compliant by both. The first change is in 31030 in TLT collections, where in addition to operators collecting transient lodging tax, if an agent such as Airbnb is used for the advertisement, management, or booking of a vacation rental home, the agent shall collect the applicable tax. Where no agent is used, the operator shall continue to collect the tax as is currently. The amendment also adds the agent as applicable to the operator's duties section of the title. And then the last change to Title III describes the returns filing process to the city, and again adds that where an agent is used, the agent shall file returns, and that in that case, the operator shall file a form confirming that the agent submitted the remittance. Moving to Title 15, the First Amendment is the change from a conditional use to a special use in the zoning use table, which changes the approval process from a Type 3 decision by the Planning Commission appealable to City Council to a Type 2 decision by the Director appealable to the Planning Commission, then City Council, then LUPA. The updates to the where allowed subsection include the overall cap based on the 2% of total number of households in the city, updated annually and published along with the number of available licenses by the Community Development Department. An update to the language since the work session is that if that 2% limit is reached, no new vacation rental permits shall be issued until an equal number of vacation rental home permits become inactive or terminated. And then a vacation rental home permit is considered inactive if the business license for the vacation rental home is not renewed within 1 year of its expiration. This subsection also includes the grandfathering, amortization, and compliance timelines with the proposed amendments. First, all vacation rental homes in operation prior to October 13th, 2013, the effective date of the current code, and vacation rental home policies may continue operating without meeting the existing standards or in structures that are not in a single-family dwelling as a legal non-conforming use pursuant to the city's non-conforming use regulations. Beyond those existing regulations, the amendment includes that not renewing the business license within 1 year of expiration, which would make the vacation rental home inactive, is specifically considered discontinuance or abandonment of the use. Second, any vacation rental home in operation prior to August 6, 2025, and these dates that are highlighted are based on the expected effective dates of a city council decision pending the commission's recommendation, shall apply for registration no later than November 4th, 90 days after the effective date, and have received approval no later than August 6th, 2025. And one note is if the commission recommends any changes to the development standards, there would be an additional category of operators who are currently operating, who have approvals, who would be allowed to be non-conforming to, say, parking if the parking standard changes, unless they expanded, changed, or lost their permit. So with the proposed language, that doesn't apply as any operator currently operating now should have been compliant with those standards in general. So to summarize, any pre-existing vacation rental homes that can demonstrate operation prior to the existing regulations can be grandfathered in their operation. Operators who began operating after the current policy was adopted must meet the current standards and be a single-family dwelling, or amortize or stop the use of their currently non-conforming operation. All operators must become registered, whether grandfathered or becoming compliant. If an operator applies within the deadline, the proposed policy from staff coming from recommendations and direction would be to not impose the new registrations penalty and that they may continue operating while they're being approved. If approval is not received or they do not apply, the penalty would be in effect as written in the proposed code language. We will talk about the penalty next, but just to note here that the penalty proposed is associated with the registration and operation. Any penalties or discussion of previous TLT collection will be a policy decision by the council. The next code change is identifying the 3 parts of registration: a land use permit, business license, and transient lodging tax registration. Operationally, staff is coordinating how to streamline this process. For example, making the business license and TLT registration on the same form on our new OpenGov permitting platform to kind of make this a more straightforward process. Once you get the land use approval, those next 2 steps are triggered and consolidated. The registration subsection also includes the proposed penalty language. The proposed penalty includes that upon notification by the city that a vacation rental home is operating while unregistered, the operator shall apply to operate within 45 days of notice and cease to operate until registration has been obtained. Violation of the provision is subject to an administrative penalty not to exceed $2,000 for the first offense and $5,000 for each additional offense, and processed in accordance with the procedures set forth in the Newberg Municipal Code. This mirrors the format that the building division, for example, uses for individual penalties that are listed outside of the city's infraction class schedule. Each confirmed rental booking following that 45-day notice shall constitute a separate violation. And as mentioned previously, the penalties for TLT, which currently are structured as a monthly interest penalty, or business licenses, it could still apply. This penalty is looking more at operation and registration on the land use, kind of that three-prong registration aspect. Moving into development standards, the draft language currently in the resolution has no changes proposed, pending the Planning Commission's deliberation and recommendation. The current standards include providing 2 parking spaces on the site available for the use of rental occupants, provision of regular refuse collection, an occupant limit of 2 per bedroom, and that no RVs, trailers, tents, or other shelters, temporary shelters, may be occupied during the tenancy. In addition to the staff report provided for the Development Code Amendment, your packet included a supplemental memo regarding parking, as the Commission discussed at the end of the work session in April. So just to give a overview of those standards, first looking at the overview of the parking required for different types of lodging in Newberg currently. 2 spaces are required for a single-family dwelling. In hotels, motels, and motorhomes, a minimum of 1 space per guest room is required, and a maximum of 1.2 or 1.5 spaces, depending on if the hotel is fronting a street with on-street parking. The vacation rental home requires 2 spaces for the use of rental occupants. When staff looked back through the previous approvals, it appeared that only one approval had indicated that only a portion of the room would be, or of the dwelling would be rented. And so staff's implementation of the standard, generally when an applicant does not indicate that only a portion and therefore the whole house will be used, is to see if there are 2 parking spaces on the site, as the whole house would be used by the rentals. And then finally, bed and breakfasts require 1 space for every 2 guest rooms, in addition to the 2 required for the single family dwelling. So there's a little bit of overlap between that one and then that partial rental versus full rental for your deliberation later. There were a couple of pathways identified that the Commission could consider. The current policy of setting a fixed requirement for the use, or a sliding scale requirement, such as 1 space for every 2 bedrooms. And finally, another consideration could be a modifier, such as the presence of on-street parking, which we see for other parking standards in the code. And then looking at the vacation rental approvals over the last, I think since 2016, the majority are 3 and 4 bedrooms, and that's also a trend that in the more recent years they have made up a greater share of the greater number of applications that have been approved. Moving on to the new standards proposed, subsection E would include the good neighbor notice requirement to all properties within 500 feet. Following that change at the work session by the Commission, the operator would then submit an affidavit of noticing as part of the business license renewal process. Subsection F includes the run with the applicant provision, that approvals are for the operator and not transferable except as provided. When the property is sold or transferred, the approval shall cease and a new registration required. Subsection F1 includes provisions that for when the approval may be transferred, and include transfer in survivorship to a spouse, domestic partner, or child, or to an LLC if the original owner is alive and the only owner of the entity. The last development standard change is the inclusion of a local manager requirement, that the owner or local manager shall be located within 40 miles of the vacation rental home. Moving on to the findings, development code amendments are required to comply with the statewide land use goals and Newberg's adopted comprehensive plan. The proposed development code amendments do not propose changes to the goals or policies of the comprehensive plan or to adopted implementing documents such as the transportation system plan, historic resources inventory, or to implementing code such as the stream corridor overlay or areas of a special flood hazard requirements. So I'll highlight some of the goals that are primarily impacted. The first statewide goal is citizen involvement. And so the update process, as you have been involved with over the last years, has included public meetings by the Planning Commission, City Council, and ad hoc committee, the Joint Commission and Council work session, outreach and engagement events, and public hearings. For the land use planning provisions, the development code amendment process follows the city's adopted land use planning process for a type 4 decision, which this recommendation is a part of, to take to City Council. And the other primarily applicable goals are economic development and housing. The proposed amendments support the comprehensive plan policies of encouraging tourist-related activities and promoting Newberg as a tourist destination, while also allowing the vacation rental home use to continue growing as the city's population grows, and providing a pathway with clear and objective standards for approval, while limiting its use of the city's housing stock by capping the overall number. The proposed changes do not impact the city's density, location, or mixed housing policies or programs designed to incentivize affordable housing or diverse housing sizes and types, such as the flexible development tract and SDC incentives. There were 3 goals in areas in the staff report and findings where previous language was carried over. And so staff is recommending the commission motion to amend these findings to remove that additional language. And so looking at the air, water, and resources quality in the statewide code, the finding acknowledges the city's acknowledged comprehensive plan and the protections that are already in place, and that the proposed amendments do not change those policies. Similarly for Plan E for natural resources, and then finally Plan Section F and Goal 7 for areas subject to natural hazards, that the proposal does not modify the adopted plans policies such as floodplains or landslide areas. The next steps as scheduled are a work session and public hearing at City Council following the Planning Commission's recommendation. And those are tentatively scheduled for June 2nd and July 7th, again, pending the recommendation by the Commission. So staff's recommendation is to consider the staff report, public testimony, and the findings, deliberate, and then make a motion to adopt resolution number 2025-399 as amended, which recommends that the City Council adopt the development code amendments to update the city's vacation rental home policy. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dingwall.
May I, Chair, Planner Dingwall, if the commission had no changes that they're recommending to the draft code amendments, the motion would be to recommend approval as drafted.
Well,
Right.
as amended
Oh, the findings.
to account for those findings.
Okay,
and
for
then
the findings.
any additional amendments proposed as well, but staff's recommendation is amended to account for those.
Oh, to account for those corrections. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Please do that through one time.
So the staff has recommended whatever you decide to do with the draft code language, if you were to modify that or not modify it, the findings have corrections to them that staff has proposed. So your motion would be to recommend as amended. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Planning Commissioner Wright, can we go back to slide 24, please?
Now that the staff report has been read, I believe we call for public testimony at this point. And I did receive to public comments. Was it Robert? Yes. If you'd like to come up, there is a 5-minute limit. And just speak your name.
Good evening. My
Um,
name's Robert Suppi, a local resident here of Newberg, and thank you all. I'd like to address two specific issues tonight. The first is caps on the number of properties, and second is special use versus conditional use. There's been discussion of capping the number of short-term rentals through a number of different methods. I would like to point out to the Commission that these different methods are not exclusive of each other. For example, you could establish both a citywide cap on the total number of rentals while also having a density cap, which is what I'd recommend. It was presented to the council last December that there were 87 vacation rentals at that time. At the same meeting, it was presented that the proposed 2% citywide cap would allow 189 total rentals. That would allow over 100 new rentals. I think it's important to consider the implication of this with no density or district cap. As you have seen from the heat map that staff has previously presented, a high percentage of these rentals are located in one area near the cultural center. It seems reasonable to assume that this trend will continue. I would like the Commission to think very carefully about what would be allowed. The residential blocks in this area typically have 7 to 10 houses on the entire block. If only half the new rentals were located in this area, they could, for example, completely occupy 7 full blocks. Think seriously about that. 7 residential blocks completely occupied by vacation rentals. That would have an enormous impact on the character of the area. Think, for example, of that would look like on the many days where the properties are vacant. What was once a great neighborhood would become a short-term ghost town. Do you want to be responsible for allowing that? Again, that assumes only half the new vacation rentals locate in this area. I think it is very difficult to understand just how much this impacts the neighborhood if you don't live in the area. Think about the difference between living next door to a hotel as compared to an apartment complex. In the first case, you don't really have neighbors. The residents are occupied less often than they are vacant, and you lose the sense of a functioning neighborhood. In the case of an apartment complex, you at least get to know the neighbors and a sense of neighborhood is established. It is very different. You might question whether or not the high density of vacation rentals I mentioned would actually happen. It may or may not, but if you don't prohibit it, then it's certainly possible. I can state that across the street from me, there is already a block where 3 of the 4 residences are vacation rentals. If you don't do anything to restrict that in the future, that trend is likely to continue. You have been offered different methods to prevent this. Those include a district-based cap or a density-based cap. My preference is towards a density-based cap. It could be done by physical distance, such as no new vacation rentals could be within 200 feet of an existing one. It could also be done simply by not allowing adjacent properties to be vacation rentals, or you could allow only every 3rd property. These would still allow a fairly high density of vacation rentals, but that is certainly preferable to no such limits at all. I would like to strongly encourage the Commission to think carefully about what you would be allowing with no density or district cap, and conclude that one of the others of these caps is necessary to preserve a fine old Newberg neighborhood. My last topic is special use versus conditional use. I'm going to try to. Under current rules, as you know, applications for vacation rentals in residential zones are heard by this body. I think this provides an appropriate amount of public input as well as a wider range of view in the approval process. The public has opportunities to have their voices heard both by written and oral testimony. This body has shown a very responsible approach towards addressing such public testimony. With the number of members on the Commission, there is a diversity of views, just as there is with the community, allowing a more comprehensive decision-making process. If the decision were to be made by a single staff member, public input would have far less impact. It has been clear from previous staff approvals that issues raised by the public often don't get addressed at all, and there's no diversity of views in the process. I don't think this is appropriate for these issues that impact residents so significantly. Anyway, I would strongly encourage you to keep this as a conditional use process and keep yourself in the loop and allow citizens to have a better voice as to what happens in their neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. And for turning off the microphone. A lot of people forget that. You're a pro, if I'm not mistaken. All right, and the other one was, Michael, do we have? Thank you. Point and stating your name and,
All right, Michael Pender. I live here in Newberg in the area over by the, I don't know, my neighborhood's representing here tonight. But the cultural center area, I do have 2 Airbnbs, and I live in that neighborhood. And I was just gonna, so we've been doing it for 6 years, and I definitely think the bookings are down. Maybe that's because there's more rentals. I'm not totally sure. I think I hadn't heard the 87 number. I think the last meeting it was like 75 Airbnbs. But I guess one of my concerns is like the tax collection, just getting a system so that it's collecting automatically. I think that we had a meeting in the library. I think that was within a year ago or something, but I remember somebody made a comment that, the city had collected $70,000 in lodging taxes, but 10,000 of that was mine. So there was definitely no way that everybody's paying. So like you could literally hire somebody to enforce that and pay that person. I do think with some of the rules that people will drop out, I think a lot of people bought houses during COVID when people would rent. They would rent my house for a week and work from home. That whole clientele is gone. They don't do that anymore. I'm just gonna kind of ramble some thoughts that, I'm not super excited about sending letters out every year. Most of my neighbors would know how to contact me, or because we manage it, like we try to stay on things. There's several in the neighborhood that are managed from an outside company. And, after watching that, I don't think I would ever do that. Like it would be, at least living that close to it. I don't always, agree with how it's run, just with nobody really on site, so to speak. And then it sounds like potentially after somebody sets up the business, maybe they haven't been paying taxes, but is it a whole nother year they might have to even get compliant with that? So that's just a question. Just when I pay those quarterly taxes, I just wonder about my competition. Are they paying? I asked somebody who doesn't live here if he pays, and he thinks that the management company is paying, but who knows, because there's no way to really know. It's all based on the honor system to pay. So, and I'm just wondering with the 2 parking spaces, are all the downtown Airbnbs not legal then? If they don't have 2 parking spaces on site? That's just like, I can think of 10 maybe. I know in my neighborhood, there's people that have permits that don't. They just got the permit to, in case they wanted to do an Airbnb someday. So the idea, originally there was an idea that you had to rent it or something within a year of that, but it sounds like the rule is now if you don't get your license renewed. So that might be something to kind of look at, because if people are getting Airbnbs to try to catch that spot before the rules change, not so much like Robert's saying for the whole city, it's basically where there's no HOAs. I live in an old 100-year-old house, so there's no HOAs. But so I can see where the density starts to grow with rentals in those neighborhoods. So at any rate, I think that's all I got. Oh, I did wonder if I couldn't tell from that slide if the applications are down for what they've been. So that's all I got. Thanks.
thank you, Michael. All right, was there anyone on Zoom who also had a hand up or anything like that?
No, only our commissioners are on Zoom.
Okay. So at this point then I will, only commissioners are on Zoom? Okay. At this point then I'll call the close of public testimony. And then, close public testimony, and then we're gonna do some final comments and recommendations. I have some, but I don't wanna just log it. Does anyone have initial comments or?
This is a comment I wish I asked last month. Do we have history as to why we went away from having duplexes be an option for vacation rentals?
Well, there hasn't necessarily been a legislative history as to why that, back in 2013 was adopted in that way. I think part of the conversation since then has been keeping the housing types that are more middle housing and diverse sizes perhaps available for a range of kind of other renters or homeowners. And by limiting it to single family, it kind of preserves an ADU or a duplex or a triplex that kind of promote that middle housing availability for other people.
And before we get too far away from the public testimony, while this is kind of fresh, I just wanted to point out that some of the concerns that were brought up were why we're going from conditional to special use. And I actually thought it nicely tied into what Michael was saying about the letters going out every year. Those are kind of two different components that we spent a lot of time discussing that actually kind of play into each other. We're kind of part of the argument for moving towards a special use away from conditional use was because the public comments and testimonies were feeling deflated because we had to adhere to the code. And the concerns that unless they were code specifically based, we were kind of, our hands were tied and we were facing a lot of frustration ourselves because we wanted to help more. And so a bit of how we've worked around that is by having the owner of the rental actually be the one to have a more individualistic touch point with the community. So those concerns of, I worry about the school bus stop or things that like we can't control is going directly more to the rental, the owner themselves. And then going to special use would be a city council thing. And then when they see those through a special use permit, they could actually be more specific in addressing code issues, which is something that we can't do. So it kind of seemed the best of both worlds as best as we could do. So I thought that was kind of, I'm happy you both brought that up because I felt they actually tied in very closely together. Commissioner Wright, I see your finger there.
Staff, is the city council to take place of the planning commission, or is the criteria determined by the CDD that it has a set of standards like the planning commission?
So in changing from the conditional use to the special use standards, the criteria that the director would be issuing the decision based off of would be the special use standards. So the parking, trash, hence, and then these new ones for noticing and local operator, and then the conditional use criteria, the ones that have talked about livability and impacts would not be applicable criteria any longer. And so the staff would be issuing the initial decision based off of those criteria. And then any appeal to planning commission would also be based off those, and then city council based off those, LUBA based off of those as well.
So confirming that the special use conditions are not seen by city council, they would be determined by city staff. The
So
CDD.
yes, they would not be, they would not be brought to council unless the decision was appealed to the planning commission, and then that decision by the planning commission was appealed to city council.
And the
Thank you.
thought process on that is that the standards are all prescriptive. They're all objective standards. So there's no ability for staff to deviate from that. We're not in a position to require more or less than what's in the code from the applicant. I think that's the key difference between special use and conditional use. Where conditional use, you've got this very subjective notion of neighborhood livability, which through your work, you're wanting to dial in on standards that address that objective of neighborhood livability. So it's sort of that balance between predictability and certainty and flexibility and uncertainty.
Commissioner Mansfield, question about current processes for bed and breakfasts. I believe we have some in town that are inside of a neighborhood or a residential area. If a large residence, say there's one vacation rental here in town on that list that has 6 bedrooms, decided that they wanted to revamp that and have staff, operate that as a bed and breakfast where, they would have staff make meals to serve the people who choose to stay in that space. What, out of curiosity to have a better understanding, what is the process they would have to go through to get that building permit or that a business permit to operate a business inside of a neighborhood like that?
So there's a similar distinction for bed and breakfasts as the current process is for vacation rentals, where depending on the zone, it's either a conditional use permit or a special use permit. And then in addition to that, there's a distinction based off of bedroom count. So similarly to how vacation rental has the special use standards for parking, trash, etc., bed and breakfasts have their own set of rules, and that includes things like the increased parking count versus vacation rental homes, but also that there's limits on how many nights a guest can stay there in a month or in a year. And then for the approval process, for bed and breakfasts that are 2 or fewer rooms, in the R1 zone, it's a conditional use, so that would come back to planning commission. And then in R2, R3, RP, and then the commercial zones, that's the special use. So it kind of reverts to what the proposal is for vacation rentals. For 3 or more bedrooms, it's a conditional use in all the R zones and RP and C1. So there's a wider range of conditional use procedures in more zones for bed and breakfasts that have higher bedroom counts, but a smaller area that has it for a smaller bedroom count, if that makes sense.
That does. And then piggybacking off that question, what if that same person who had a large home like that felt like the best need would be to open up a business to care for people with needs, either the elderly or maybe some special needs people that would then stay and be housed in that space, but it'd be operated as a business? Do we have a series of regulations for that type of an operation?
So there aren't special use standards for that operation. We would look at the kind of what the definition of that is for the use category, and then I think that would likely be a group care facility or that type of thing. And so we would look at what zones it's permitted in, and then if it is permitted, it would follow the kind of general development standards. But there aren't specific special use standards for that use, for example.
Thank you.
Really great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess Commissioner Mansfield's still here. What I guess what I'm getting at is I'm trying to understand all the different businesses that we allow to operate inside of residential areas, and what are the regulations therein that we, and compare that to what are current and these currently recommended regulations for vacation rentals might be. I think you can make a pretty clear correlation between an actual bed and breakfast where someone pays for a room and comes down and gets a meal in the dining room or kitchen in a home, to be pretty adjacent to a vacation rental where they're just getting access to the home to stay in it, in terms of how it's operated and what its impact to the community might look like, as well as taking a residential space and converting it to a care facility, where you're going to have increased traffic of people coming to go and visit those residents or whatnot. That seems to have another corollary to how a vacation rental might, all of those seem to impact a neighborhood in a similar fashion, I guess is what I'm realizing, getting at, and wanting to ask to see how we treat all those differently.
might mention, and thank you, Commissioner Mansfield, those are great questions. With residential care, on the one hand, the state regulates that and preempts what cities can do, but it also affords the city some control over the facility or the care home based on the number of occupants. So, for example, a residential care home of 5 or fewer people generally is permitted outright in all residential zones. Once you get up to 6 to 15 people in a residential care facility, then it becomes a conditional use in the R1 zone. It's permitted in R2 and R3, conditional in R4, and it varies in other zones. And once you get above 16 people, it's conditional use in all of the zones in which it's allowed. So it's an interesting parallel. There are some differences, though. I think that it gets to that kind of that scale or impact that you're describing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wright, do our current vacation rentals comply with ADA standards?
That would be determined during any building permit process. It's the planning land use application doesn't include that as a criteria for the land use side, but any changes based off of the building permit process may trigger that. Scott, if you have something else to add.
It's really case specific depending on what the occupancy is of that building. And if it's, I think because vacation home rentals are limited to single family dwellings, it remains under the residential code, and ADA is not applicable to single family dwellings. So that might be the answer.
Thank you. It is.
Just because I can't see, is that anything on Zoom that we're not missing? Okay. Fantastic.
Commissioner Mansfield again. Maybe just curious, so the point of where we're at now in the agenda, are we discussing and putting our affirming or disaffirming to the changes that have been made since our last meeting? Is that correct?
Well, it wasn't necessarily the changes so much, but it was our discussion and the points that they have now taken into account with the staff recommendations of the things that we did. So it was which I appreciated your point about the 2 spots and all this stuff that we've put in. So now with the recommendations for the code amendments as well, that would be more in line with the findings. That's what we're going to be moving towards a vote on. So just based on the public testimony and any other points, ADA, accessibility, any of these other things that we want to deliberate upon, if I'm not mistaken. So, I got it right? Fantastic.
Thank you, Lainey.
Yes.
Yeah, so then I guess I'd love to do maybe a quick discussion. The team here did a great job presenting those 4 examples of current parking requirements, and looking at what is currently required. And I have a quick question for staff. If I'm understanding the parking requirement for bed and breakfasts, since it says that it also needs to comply with single family residences, that automatically includes a minimum of 2 parking spaces?
Yeah, so there always have to have 2, and then for each increase above that, it's 4 bedrooms is 3 space. 3, I guess 4 bedrooms would be 2 spaces, 6 bedrooms would be 3 spaces, etc.
And on that, is that because that's the sliding scale requirement? 'Cause
Part of the consideration there is the bed and breakfast special use standards require the operator to be on site. So that's somebody who's living there in addition to the renters. And that kind of gets to that distinction that we mentioned about. I think typically the applications we see don't distinguish in their narrative kind of if they'll be renting one room or the whole house, which might be something that we look at asking in our application forms, depending on where that direction goes.
And do we need to take into consideration the fixed sliding or modified, or is there any action required on our part with that regard, with regards to that? Sorry.
So that memo is first deliberation, and if commission would like to propose an amendment to the recommended draft, that kind of would factor into that. Kind of just serving as background info for your consideration of whether or not proposing an amendment to the parking standard
Yeah,
would be applicable.
yeah. So the proposed ordinance does not include any changes to the parking requirement. This commission had asked for more information about parking standards that apply to other types of lodging, and that's what's presented in the staff memo. And then Planner Dingwell's outlined a few different approaches if you were wanting to require additional parking. And then you can walk through what those alternatives were. But there are any number of ways that you could approach that. We were just trying to provide some illustrations.
Yes, thank you. And then one question again on the parking, that our resident brought up that I do have a question about. There are a number of vacation rentals in the downtown corridor that at just a citizen's glance, doesn't seem like there's any parking provided for them. I believe there's a unit above the Brevaro Cellars just off of the main street that is an Airbnb, but I don't see two designated parking spaces for that dwelling. What's going on there?
So there's kind of, I think, two factors there. One would be kind of on a definitional point. So in the C3 zone, motels and hotels have a very similar definition to vacation bed and breakfasts, or to vacation rental homes, but don't cite the single family dwelling. So the code would consider a vacation rental unit that's not in a single family dwelling in those zones as a hotel or motel. So that could end up being a one unit hotel, but how the hotel and motel definitions are written, it accepts vacation rentals, and so for it to be considered a vacation rental, it would have to be in that single family dwelling, and in that case would require the two parking spaces. But any other short-term rental in a different type of dwelling in a zone that permits hotels or motels would fall under that bucket. And then I think the second category would just depend on when it was adopted. So I mean, if it had been approved in 2010 and that two parking space requirement wasn't there, that, as long as they've maintained and in theory paid their TLT and have business license, they would be allowed to grandfather that different parking standard.
And Commissioner Mansfield, I think that was that slide that had the three. There was the grandfathering and then yeah.
I'm just curious about
But I think
details.
the big answer is more that definitional question about those kind of fall more under the hotel motel as opposed to the single family dwelling carve out for.
Because
vacation
specifically on
rentals.
99, that's not residential zoning, that's commercial zoning. So even though there's apartments above
Yeah.
businesses, they classify as
Yeah, that
as
would be
commercial.
a mixed use dwelling, and then it's just a
Yeah.
rental in the mixed use dwelling that has.
That makes sense. Well, then, I would, based off of these findings and looking at the data, I was curious if you could go back to the slides with the different numbers of, or the numbers of vacation rentals by bedroom. Looking for the graph that shows. Awesome. So if we adopted the bed and breakfast parking requirement of a minimum of 2 or 1 per every 2 spaces, and we rounded down, that would only affect the single 6-bedroom space, which, as we looked at the start of this meeting, already has 3 parking spaces. So that wouldn't affect any of the current units. If we were to adopt the bed and breakfast model rounding up on the 0.5, it would affect those 5 residences, or those 6 residences with 5 bedrooms, that they would have to have 3 per for their vacation rental, 3 parking spaces off-site or off-street, on-site. Is
One
what I'm
note,
looking at right
one
now.
note would be that kind of this, changing the development standards that they were approved under would create that fourth category of these approved rentals.
They would be
could
grandfathered in
continue
as whatever
with-
they're at.
With the two spaces, and then it would be for new applications.
Sorry to interrupt.
That would require 4 parking spaces for a 4-bedroom vacation rental, wouldn't it?
No, the bed and breakfast says that one off-street
Oh, one-
parking for every two
One for every 2.
sleeping
Okay.
rooms. So a 4-bedroom place would have 4 bedrooms. Divide that by 2, you get 2 parking spaces.
And not requiring the 2 for the single family use, is that where you're going?
The bed and breakfast says, so that's saying in addition to parking standard normally required.
It's in addition.
So a 4-bedroom bed and breakfast would have to have 4 parking spaces? Is that how that's currently done?
It would. Yeah. Yeah, so you've got 4 bedrooms, you've got 1 for every 2, 1 parking space for every 2, so that's 2 parking spaces for vacation rental use and 2 for the single family use within that. So it's totally.
Okay, I must be reading that differently. I'm reading that as they're saying, in addition to this regulation, or regardless of that regulation, the parking standards normally required for a single family residence will apply. So I think what they're saying on a bed and breakfast that only has a 2-bedroom, they still need 2 parking spaces, not 1 parking space.
Yes, the floor is the single family.
Okay.
Well, so I've said a lot, sorry. What I guess as Commissioner Mansfield, I'm proposing that we should adopt the parking requirements for bed and breakfasts to vacation rentals as well. And if we were to do that as it sits, even though all of the current vacation rentals will be grandfathered in, if we adopt the bed and breakfast policy for vacation rentals, and we ask for it to be rounding up instead of down, it seems like it would only affect 7 of the current vacation rentals, which is a very small percentage. If that ratio tracks forward as we get more and more vacation rentals, it's a very small percentage that would be affected. Does that make sense?
Do any of the other commissioners have any more comments?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Start up and around it.
Guess I'm about to roll. Okay, Plan Commissioner Wright moves to recommend resolution 2025-399, Newberg Municipal Code Title 15 to update vacation rental home policy with the following draft code amendments to Exhibit A, Development Code, also named Draft Code Compliance Change PDF, as shown on April 10th, 2025 work session. Newberg Municipal Code Zoning Table, strike S, insert C, remaining for CUPs to remain for R1s and R2s, including Planning Commission as the hearing body for the quasi judicial and legislative matters for vacation rental homes, R1 through R2. In the Newberg Municipal Code Zoning Table, including page 3 or 4, April 10th work session, DCC PDF, 15.445.310, add AI density cap at 25% of all R1, R2 zones in the old downtown core. The old downtown core to be determined by staff and city council. 15.445.330 standards, strike and replace with A, parking standards for bed and breakfast to be adopted for vacation rental homes, Newberg Municipal Code 15.445.33A. You go to 15.445, 0.010C. Add I to Newberg Municipal Code 445.330 standards. Require approved smoke alarms, fire extinguishers to be mounted and visible in key locations, clear exit routes, alternative escape methods for buildings of 2 or more floors. Add J, inspection of vacation rentals to be in compliance with all applicable Newberg municipal codes upon verbal or written complaint. And I will repeat that if needed.
A motion has been made. Are there any seconds? Hearing none, we will return to the deliberation and comments from recommendations from commissioners.
Are there any parts that commissioners would not agree with?
You're citing April and I don't like have that up and ready. Like you went back.
It's the same one. Sorry, it is the same one. The second, 122 page one was just submitted to us yesterday. And that's why I referenced that one. And I'm sorry, I had an emergency. I had to take a family member to a hospital. So I was not able to correlate that in its entirety, but it is the same document, just kind of added to it multiple pages.
Thank you for your due diligence on that though.
Sure.
Please.
There were a couple changes since the work session document. And that included the 40 miles, the transfer of ownership, the noticing going to all residences as opposed to just residential. So there were a couple changes since the work session document.
Yes, I see that. I do agree with Commissioner Mansfield about the parking. That it would be, I would like to see us adopt the bed and breakfast parking standards.
So I'm going to come back around to that because that's what I was still wrapping around when you started your deep dive into the due diligence that you do, and the time that you spend on that is very appreciated. I keep coming back to that, the first PDF with the parking memo. The way I was just trying to wrap around it, so now we're throwing in the bed and breakfast, which is fine. I was trying to think of it as outlined here from a fixed requirement sliding to modified, and I was intrigued by the sliding because do you see Commissioner Mansfield to what I'm referring to there? It says the sliding scale requirement is 1 off-street parking space required for every 2 bedrooms, rounded up or down to the nearest whole number. For example, a 4-bedroom required rental 1 + 1 = 2 for the off-street spaces. Does that address
So
that
yeah,
map
so
that
the-
you're looking for?
Well, that's there in the bed and breakfast, but what the sliding requirement as it sits doesn't apply is for maintaining a minimum of 2 spaces. So if you had a 2-bedroom vacation rental, they would only need 1 space under just the sliding.
Okay,
Where
so-
with the bed and breakfast, there's a last note makes it clear that the minimum needs to be
Mm-hmm.
to follow single family requirements, which would be 2
Okay.
spaces, and then look at the sliding scale.
Okay,
is-
so it's more of, I'm gonna throw this out there and shoot me down if this isn't where you're coming from. It's more of the sliding scale, but that base to be 2 + 1 as outlined here. So it'd be, for example, a 4-bedroom required, a rental required 2 + 1 would = 3.
No, that's, sorry, that's not what I'm getting at. So a 4-bedroom space under the bed and breakfast parking requirement would still just need 2 off-street parking spaces.
Mhm.
But the worry is for a three and less would, under just the sliding scale, if you did if you rounded down, would only require one parking space. So I think that no matter what, the minimum should be two parking spaces going. And if your number of bedrooms exceeds that by doing the total divided by two, then you go to that number. Based off of the data that we have of the number of spaces or a number of vacation rentals right now, all but 7 of the, let's say 86 or 7 that we have already meet the requirement of 2, and under this bed and breakfast requirement would still meet that requirement of 2. Only the 6 5-bedroom and the 1 6-bedroom that would need to that would have, if they were applied for today, would have the need for 3 parking spaces.
May I understand, I think the direction that you're going with this. If you wanted to establish a minimum of 2 spaces in all cases, whether it's a 1-bedroom vacation rental or a 5-bedroom vacation rental, you could establish that. You could require additional parking, whatever ratio you want to establish it at. That's different than the bed and breakfast standard, which requires 2 spaces for the single family residence and additional parking for the B&B use based on the number of bedrooms. 1 off-street parking space for every 2 permitted guest sleeping rooms. So I think that's different than what you're describing, unless I'm not understanding it.
Yeah, maybe, I thought we had already cleared that up in the verbiage there of a bed and breakfast. It says a minimum of 1 off-street parking space shall be provided for every 2 permitted guest sleeping rooms. In addition, parking standards normally required for a single family residence will apply.
In addition.
So
yes.
I feel like that's saying, and correct me because I'm not good with the legalese here, but I thought that was saying this is the standard that at least a minimum of 1 off-street parking shall be provided for every guest room. So if it's or for every 2, for permitted for every 2 permitted guest sleeping rooms. So if it's a 2-bedroom, it would only require 1. However, they're saying the normal standards are for a single family must apply as well, which would raise that to a 2-bedroom, to a 2 parking space, not make that a 3 parking space requirement. Are you reading that differently, saying that in a 2-bedroom bed and breakfast, under that code, they need to have 3 parking spaces?
Well, I'm reading that in addition as plus. So we can research that. If that's not how the city has interpreted that in the past, then we would, all I'm suggesting is that you be very clear about the quantity of parking you want to require. And if it happens that it's the same formula that's required for bed and breakfast ends, fine. Just describe the standard that you'd like to see in the code and we'll reconcile that.
Yeah, okay, then if I were to reword it, I would say that a minimum of 1 off-street parking space shall be provided for every 2 permitted guest sleeping rooms with a minimum of 2 parking spaces required.
We can implement that if that's the direction that you decide to go.
And I would want that rounded up. I don't know how to reword all of that to get that rounded up, but.
Where's the rounded, are you saying rounded down? Does that go back to the sliding scale?
Yes, in
Portion?
reference, yeah, for the rounded up. So I don't know if
Or
there's a
total-
way.
Okay, rounded up or down.
And I might just add some context. And the reason that I'm reading it in that way is that a bed and breakfast inn has staff, right?
Mhm,
It has
yeah.
their additional people on the premises that a vacation rental. So I think that's why it's worded that way, but we'll look into that as well.
Out of, just for clarification too, if we were to make a motion to pass it with the recommendations from the findings, that we're saying that doesn't take into account any of the parking memo considerations, like if we to make a motion to move forward with that, there are no parking.
I think staff would be looking for a motion to approve the recommendation as amended for the findings
Mhm.
and as amended for whatever,
Okay, okay,
additional changes that the commission.
okay. I have, and so you're saying that you want that bed and breakfast kind of for everybody, just like the bed and breakfast.
Yeah, I would like for vacation rentals to be, it be listed that you take another way to word it is to take
Mhm,
the
mhm.
total number of bedrooms, divide it by 2, round up. And as long as that exceeds a minimum of 2, that's the number of bedrooms you need.
So, for the parking, so I'm gonna say this out loud and,
Parking
and see if I'm, so we were to make the consideration for, a minimum of 1 off-street parking space to be provided for every 2 permitted guest sleeping rooms with a minimum parking standard of, where would you want to go from there? The minimum parking standard, where 1 parking space is made for every 2 bedroom, no. I'm just trying to combine some of the existing terminology here. So
Yeah.
try and come up with something a little bit more conclusive. to move forward with.
Alternatively, we could set up maybe a table like it is already in, the municipal 040.430 parking spaces required for multifamily dwellings that has a table that shows for like apartment complexes that studio is 1, a 2-bedroom unit is 1.5, a 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom are 2, and 5 or more bedrooms are 0.75 per bedroom. For the number of spaces required, we could adopt. Is that possible, staff, to adopt some of the draft like in that code to say for 1, 2, and 3-bedroom vacation rentals, you need 2 units, and then for 4 plus, it's number of units divided, number of bedrooms divided by 2, rounded up.
Yeah, we would develop a table, and that could be in the code, or it could be part of a handout, part of, guidance that staff provides. But I think the idea is just to be very clear, because questions can arise, like, are we rounding up or are we rounding down? What are we doing with the calculation? What I'm hearing you say is that at a minimum, 2 spaces are required,
Mhm.
and the standard is 1 space for every sleeping room or every guest room. I mean, it's every 2, 1 space for every 2 guest rooms, with a minimum requirement of 2 parking spaces. It's clear.
So that would be stated in a formula, number of beds divided by 2 equals parking spaces required, with a minimum of 1 parking space per guest written, with a minimum of 2 parking spaces.
And the other dimension of that was, are you rounding up or are you rounding down for those fractions?
Yeah, I'd want to round up.
I did pick up on that.
don't
I
know if
got
said
that.
that enough.
So, thank you, Commissioner Wright. That's, okay, so with base 2 with 1 additional on, what was that phrase, off-street parking? So base 2 with 1 additional off-street parking per
2 guests.
3rd bedroom and up?
No, for every 2 guest rooms.
Every-
I'm sorry.
Base 2 with 1 additional off-street parking for every 2 guest rooms. Street parking for each. For every 2 guest rooms. Say it one more time.
So it would be something to the extent of, at a minimum, single-family dwelling parking spaces, number is required.
Mhm, mhm.
When otherwise, it is the number of bedrooms divided by 2 is the number of spaces you need rounded up.
And Commissioner Mansfield, do you think this should be limited to R1 and R2 or the zoning table across the board?
That's a great question. I think that it, at the least, should be required for R1 and R2. I think and when we look at the the plot map, I could refer to staff, how many spaces are in R3 and R4 that are being used as vacation rentals right now?
I can pull up that. The vast majority of them are in R1 and R2. And I think C3 also has downtown. But I can pull up the.
I don't think it's fair to apply it to something in C, any of the commercial districts, but I think in the residential districts, that's what's fair to ask for, and I think that is what's meeting the livability requirement of our community.
I mean, is that not a little? I mean, there wouldn't be our residential, a single family dwelling housing in that commercial area, would there? Wasn't that a little contradictory? Like we would,
So there are some, and the current use table has that for a single family dwelling in a commercial zone, it has to be an existing dwelling to be used as a vacation rental home. So somebody can't build a new dwelling and use it as that in the C zones, but there are
Maybe a prime
some
example of that is the single family residence that got moved from George Fox to, what is that, Second Street, on the same street as the police station? You know, if the verbiage wasn't properly written there, someone could have moved that home and then turned it into a vacation rental and got around all sorts of things.
it was an amazing feat of engineering.
Good eye, Commissioner Mansfield.
I'm trying to wrap around this verbally because I would like to make a motion and make sure that it is addressed accordingly. So, sorry, I had a long day and now I'm here, so bear with me.
I would like to ask other commissioners one more question in deliberation about how they feel about being removed completely from the zoning table as a conditional use permit.
How do you mean from the zoning table?
On the zoning table, if we strike the C and C in R1 and R2, then that takes this commission out completely unless it is a rebuttal or it
Appeal.
appears before us at a later time if rebutted.
Commissioner Mansfield, I feel like we've got enough public comment, and show that there is a for this to stay as a conditional use requirement as opposed to a special use requirement because of the need for the general public to be able to speak their comments. I know there is pathways under the special use, but I feel like they're less utilized by our public and less attainable for them to get involved and speak to something. So for that reason, I feel like we need to keep it as a conditional use permit.
Yeah, and I was looking through 15.445.350 complaints from revocation of registration. In some of these, the city must receive 2 or more written complaints within 1 year to even trigger this. Then it goes through potential code compliance officer. A hearing may be conducted by a city manager or a hearings officer appointed by the city manager. It can be revoked in registration, impose additional conditions. All this is added to it, and I really feel that I feel the city can take public comments, but there is no Oregon or federal law that mandates their consideration be included. I've even been directed by our previous CDD, Doug Rux. I didn't have to acknowledge public testimony or bring up specifics submitted. As a planning commissioner, we represent the citizens. I don't agree with that ideology. By the laws of this country and our state, it is mandatory to consider public testimony in all matters brought before any and all governing bodies. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Wright.
Commissioner Quinn, to help you with the verbiage, I do think it may be the best to have the staff create a table showing that for in one row, it would be for vacation rentals of 3 bedrooms or less, require 2 spaces. For vacation rentals of 4 or more, number of spaces divided by 2, rounded up. Would be the table to distinguish parking spaces you would need. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. As a,
And would any of the commissioners consider a 25% density cap around the old downtown core by Chehalem? And the old well, I do believe it's around 7 blocks or so. Is that old downtown core of residential by the Chehalem Park and Rec?
Yeah, Commissioner Mansfield, I struggle with a density requirement just because it creates, struggling to word this right, so please forgive me. But it creates what could be perceived almost as a unfair or unequally distributed regulations on citizens for, you know, if someone was just, that late to the game on deciding to do an Airbnb and they find out, they can't do it because too many of their neighbors are doing it. Or someone who, depending on how we write that, it just puts a number of citizens in a place where all of a sudden their home is maybe that much less valuable because they can't make that as an option if they wanted to sell or move away to prospective buyers. And I think it creates in that regard, I feel like it creates an unequal tightness and restriction on the liberties of homeowners to do with their home as they will.
I think you phrased that really well. Mansfield. I'd like to point out that the whole point of this, a big crux to this issue was homeowners' rights and the livability, and that has been discussed in the past, and it's contradictory to the core ideal of what we're trying to go here. And it would be not in alignment with homeowners' rights in that regard. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution number 2025-399, which recommends that the city council adopt the development code amendments to update the city's vacation rental home policy with the corrections of the findings as recommended per the staff, with the contingency that staff create a table with regards to parking to create a base 2 with math to round up based on the number of sleeping rooms.
I'll second that motion.
Hearing a
Before you-
second, I will take, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just would ask the commission in your discussion before voting, if you could clarify the number of parking spaces that you're wanting to require per 2 sleeping rooms. So I think I didn't hear and I may have missed it, I didn't hear the number, and in your discussion earlier, I think Commissioner Mansfield was considering 2, for every 2 sleeping rooms, a parking space would be required, right? With a minimum of 2.
Yes, that's
Okay, sorry, I don't want to intercede, but that,
What I said was a base 2 with a table to take into consideration additional parking spaces per additional sleeping room. Is that how, like, per sleeping room in a residence? For 2 sleeping rooms. Does that sound right?
I think so.
So, sorry. It's just
We can repeat.
Clarify for-
Staff can follow.
I said based on the creation of the table
Yeah.
for approval.
So minimum 2 spaces, so 1 through 4 bedrooms would be 2 spaces because at that floor, then for a 5th and 6th bedroom is a 3rd space, for a 7th and 8th bedroom is a 4th space, etc. Beyond that.
Mhm.
The way that is what I'm thinking. The way it makes most sense to me would be 1 column for 3 or less bedrooms, 2 spaces. For 4 or more bedrooms, number of bedrooms divided by 2, rounded up is the number of spaces that you need.
Yes, that is, you made that clear earlier, and thank you for bringing that back up. Would you like me to restate the motion to add to that clarification, or is that sufficient? This came in after the motion.
It's,
Rachel's
yes,
got it.
we've got it and we've got it on the minutes on the recording as well.
On the recording. Thank you very much. Having heard a second from Commissioner Dale to that motion, ask for a roll call vote, please.
And may I ask, after this roll call, at the first vote, I forgot to call out Commissioner Villalpando's name. So I'd love to go back and capture his vote after this. So the first motion that was made. But let me call this roll call. Commissioner Rickert,
Yes.
Dale,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Wright,
No.
Mansfield,
To confirm, this motion would still push forward as a special use permit? No.
and Villalpando.
Yes.
Thank you. And then, if I can go back to the first motion made earlier tonight, for the minutes approval, Commissioner Villalpando, did you have a vote for that?
Yeah, it was a yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, if I'm not mistaken, motion passes. I just want to add that there has been, the only reason that we had this conversation and motion tonight was because of all of the community input that we received over the last several years, the hours that the staff, past and present, has put into this, and a few rounds of people on the commission who have been involved with that. So I really appreciate everybody's time from every component of that. It took a lot of hours of everybody's life, so thank you. That takes us, if I'm not mistaken, to the second to last items from staff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. At your next meeting on June 12th, we have a conditional use permit application coming before you, not for a vacation rental, for an extension to an existing wireless facility. And then in July, looks like tentatively the first work session, believe it or not, on the next round of annual code maintenance amendments. We're going to continue with that process. And then the rest of the summer is charted out in your memo. If you have any questions, happy to answer. We're still looking at bringing an update to you on housing development, housing production, something the commission was interested in. And in talking with one of our planners who leads that work for the planning division, we're trying to align that report with annual reporting that we do for the state, because the state also asks for certain data that I think this commission would be interested in. So it may not be until later in the summer that we would bring that to you, unless you wanted it to come sooner. And then, of course, we would do everything that we can to prepare for that. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Community Development Director. I believe the last item is just items from commissioners.
Commissioner Wright? I want to direct everybody to our special district voter pamphlet. We have a special district vote going on. Please get your ballots in by May 20th, 2025. And I encourage you to vote regardless of who you vote for. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. Always very, very, very important, especially on the local ones.
Yes.
Appreciate your insight there. Was there any other commissioner items from anyone on Zoom or anybody else as well? Hearing none, I also want to thank City Councilor for joining us. Thank you for your involvement and your support as well. So thank you for being here tonight. I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.